The 1960s were the golden age of American when Detroit built the fastest, most powerful production cars the world had ever seen. But not every car from that legendary decade lived up to the promise. Today, we're counting down the 12 worst 60s muscle cars of all time. Vehicles that wore performance badges they didn't deserve. Legendary nameplates attached to disappointing powertrains, and cars that looked fast but couldn't back it up when the light turned green. These are the pretenders, the posers, and the profound disappointments from muscle cars' greatest decade. Number 12. The 1966 Oldsmobile Cutlass Base 58. The Oldsmobile Cutlass would become one of the most successful muscle car platforms of the late 60s, spawning legendary variants like the 442 and the Hurst Olds. But in 1966, the base Cutlass with its 330 cubic in V8 represented everything that was wrong with badge engineering and half-hearted performance attempts. This was a car that looked the part, but couldn't deliver when performance mattered. The 330 cubic in V8 produced just 250 horsepower, barely adequate for moving the Cutlass's 3,300 pounds curb weight with any enthusiasm. 1/4 mile times hovered around 16 seconds, making the base Cutlass slower than most contemporary family sedans and embarrassingly slow compared to genuine muscle cars. 0 to 60 acceleration required over 9 seconds. The engine's architecture was typical Oldsmobile, with cast iron construction and conservative design parameters. The compression ratio was modest. The camshaft was ground for low-speeded torque rather than high RPM power, and the carburetor was calibrated for fuel economy and smooth operation rather than maximum performance. The cylinder heads featured small ports and valves that restricted airflow at higher engine speeds, limiting the engine's ability to breathe efficiently under full throttle. The intake manifold was a basic cast iron design that prioritized low-speed torque delivery over maximum horsepower output. The exhaust manifolds were restrictive cast iron units that created significant back pressure, further strangling the engine's performance potential. The ignition system was a conventional point-type distributor that required regular maintenance and provided adequate but unexceptional spark delivery. The valve springs were relatively soft, designed for durability and quiet operation rather than high RPM stability. The connecting rods were cast rather than forged, saving weight and cost, but limiting the engine's ability to withstand sustained high RPM operation. The crankshaft was adequately counterweighted for smooth operation, but wasn't balanced to the precision levels found in true performance engines. The oil pump was a standard volume unit that provided adequate lubrication for normal driving, but could struggle to maintain proper pressure during sustained high-speed operation. The cooling system featured a modest radiator and standard water pump that were sufficient for normal use, but marginal for any kind of performance driving in hot weather. The engine mounts were soft rubber units designed to isolate vibration and provide a quiet, comfortable driving experience rather than the solid connection preferred by performance enthusiasts. The power delivery was smooth but uninspiring, building gradually from idle without any dramatic surge or exciting character. The exhaust note was muted and civilized, filtered through restrictive manifolds and a quiet muffler system. This was a V8 that sounded more like a taxi than a muscle car, producing mechanical hum rather than the thunder enthusiasts expected. The handling was typical mid-60s GM Intermediate, which meant soft suspension tuned for ride comfort rather than any kind of sporting behavior. Body roll was excessive in corners. The steering was over-assisted and vague, and the overall chassis behavior was disconnected and imprecise. Inside, the Cutlass featured typical mid-60s Oldsmobile interior design with bench seats, basic instrumentation, and materials that looked and felt economy grade. There was nothing special about the cabin, nothing to suggest this was anything other than a standard intermediate sedan. The exterior styling was handsome and well-proportioned with clean lines and attractive details that made the Cutlass popular with buyers who valued appearance over performance. The problem was that nothing about the styling suggested the car's fundamental lack of capability. Number 11. The 1969 Plymouth Barracuda Base 58. The Plymouth Barracuda entered the pony car wars in 1964, beating the Mustang to market by a few weeks. By 1969, the Barracuda had been restyled into an attractive fastback coupe that looked genuinely sporty and aggressive. But with the base 318 cubic in V8, This fish had no teeth, delivering disappointing performance that couldn't compete with Mustangs, Camaros, or even its own big block siblings. The 318 cubic inch V8 produced 230 horsepower, adequate for moving the Barracuda's 3,200 pounds mass, but not enough to provide any kind of exciting performance. 1/4 mile times hovered around 16.5 seconds, making the base Barracuda slower than most V6-powered cars today. 0 to 60 acceleration required over 8 seconds. Passing maneuvers on 2-lane highways required extensive planning and a long stretch of clear pavement to execute safely. Highway merging demanded patience and careful timing as the 318 struggled to build enough speed to join fast-moving traffic confidently. The automatic transmission standard on most base Barracuda models further compromised performance with slow, lazy shifts that sapped what little power the engine produced. Even with the optional 4-speed manual transmission, the narrow power band meant constant shifting to keep the engine in its limited sweet spot. Fuel economy was the only theoretical benefit of the week, 318, but even that proved disappointing, with most owners reporting figures in the mid-teens. The engine felt perpetually breathless, above 4,000 RPM, producing more noise than actual acceleration as it approached redline. Torque output was equally disappointing at just 340 pound-feet, barely enough to spin the rear tires on dry pavement, even with aggressive clutch dumps. The carburetor venturi was small, restricting airflow and creating a noticeable flat spot during mid-range acceleration. The distributor advance curve was calibrated conservatively, retarding timing to prevent detonation, but robbing the engine of responsiveness and power. The air cleaner assembly was restrictive, prioritizing engine longevity and noise reduction over performance capability. Contemporary road tests consistently criticized the base Barracuda's anemic performance, with magazine editors noting that nearly every competitor offered better acceleration and more engaging driving dynamics. The 318 was Chrysler's corporate small block in its mildest form, designed primarily for taxi and police fleet service rather than performance applications. The compression ratio was low, the camshaft was ground for low-speed torque and fuel economy, and the 2-barrel carburetor was calibrated for smooth operation rather than maximum power. The power delivery was flat and uninspiring across the entire rev range, with no surge of acceleration or exciting character anywhere in the power band. The engine note was muted and mechanical, producing sounds more appropriate to a delivery van than a sporty coupe. The handling was competent for a pony car of the era, with the Barracuda's relatively compact dimensions and reasonable weight distribution. The problem was that, without adequate power, all of that chassis capability went largely unused. Inside, the Barracuda featured Plymouth's typical late 60s interior design, with vinyl upholstery, basic instrumentation, and materials that looked and felt economy grade. The seats were flat and unsupportive, providing minimal lateral support during cornering. The exterior styling was the Barracuda's greatest strength, with attractive fastback proportions and aggressive details that made the car look genuinely quick. The problem was that the styling created expectations the base V8 powertrain could never meet. Number 10. The 1967 Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu Base Viv. 8. The Chevelle nameplate would become legendary through high-performance SS variants with big block power. But the base Malibu, with its weak V8, represented the opposite end of the spectrum. This was a car that wore Chevelle badges while delivering performance that would embarrass a contemporary station wagon. The 283 cubic inch V8 produced just 195 horsepower, barely adequate for moving the Chevelle's 3,300 pounds curb weight. 1/4 mile time stretched to approximately 17 seconds. 0 to 60 acceleration required over 10 seconds. The 283 was Chevrolet's original small block in its twilight years, a design dating back to 1955 that was thoroughly outdated by the mid-60s. The 2-barrel carburetor provided adequate fuel delivery for normal operation, but choked off any attempt at performance. The cylinder heads were ancient castings with small valves and restrictive ports that couldn't flow enough air to support any kind of meaningful power output. The intake manifold was a basic cast iron design that bottlenecked airflow and created uneven fuel distribution across the cylinders. The camshaft was ground with minimal lift and duration, producing a smooth idle and good low-speeded torque, but absolutely no high RPM capability. The compression ratio had been reduced over the years to accommodate lower octane fuel, further sapping what little power the aging design could muster. The exhaust manifolds were log-style cast iron units that created massive back pressure and trapped heat in the engine bay. The ignition system featured a conventional points distributor that required frequent adjustment and provided inconsistent spark timing under load. The valve train used stamped steel rocker arms that flexed under stress and contributed to the engine's inability to rev freely. The pistons were heavy cast aluminum pieces designed for durability rather than performance, increasing reciprocating mass and limiting engine responsiveness. The oil pump was a low-volume design, barely adequate for the engine's needs, leading to marginal oil pressure at idle when the engine was hot. The timing chain was a simple roller design that stretched with age, further degrading performance and creating timing inconsistencies. By 1967, the 283 was living on borrowed time, a relic from the Eisenhower era, trying to compete in the muscle car decade and failing miserably at every measure of performance. The power delivery was smooth, but completely uninspiring, building gradually from idle without any drama or excitement. Under hard acceleration, the 283 would rev willingly but deliver minimal forward progress, creating the impression of an engine working hard while accomplishing little. The handling was typical mid-60s GM, intermediate with soft suspension tuned for ride comfort. Body roll was excessive. The steering was over-assisted and vague, and the overall chassis behavior felt disconnected from driver inputs. Inside, the Chevelle Malibu featured typical mid-60s Chevrolet interior design with bench seats, basic instrumentation, and materials that looked and felt cheap. The vinyl upholstery was thin and uncomfortable, and the overall ambiance was pure economy car. The exterior styling was handsome and well proportioned with clean lines that aged well and created an attractive intermediate coupe. The problem with base Malibu models was the complete disconnect between appearance and capability. Number 9. The 1968 Dodge Polar, the Dodge Polaro represented Chrysler's attempt to bring muscle car styling to the full-size segment, creating a vehicle that looked aggressive and purposeful, but was far too heavy and underpowered to deliver any kind of genuine performance. This was a full-size sedan, pretending to be something it wasn't. The 318 cubic in V8 produced 230 horsepower, numbers that sound adequate until you consider the Polar's massive 3,900 pounds curb weight. 1 per mile. Time stretched to approximately 17 seconds. 0 to 60 acceleration required over 11 seconds. Asterisk, the 318 engine was Chrysler's workhorse. Small block designed for durability and fuel economy rather than performance. In the massive Polar, it felt perpetually overmatched, constantly working at maximum effort just to move the car's substantial mass at modest speeds. The 2-baro carburetor was calibrated, so lean for fuel economy that the engine stumbled and hesitated during aggressive throttle applications. The camshaft profile was exceptionally mild, with minimal lift and duration that prioritized smooth idle quality over any semblance of performance capability. The cylinder heads featured small ports and valves that created significant restriction, choking airflow and limiting the engine's breathing capacity at any RPM. The intake manifold was a basic cast iron design with runners, sized for a low-et torque rather than high RPM power, further limiting performance potential. The exhaust manifolds were restrictive cast iron logs that trapped heat and created back pressure, robbing the engine of what little power it could produce. The compression ratio was a modest 8.6621, low enough to run on regular fuel, but inadequate for generating meaningful cylinder pressure and power output. The distributor advance curve was calibrated conservatively, retarding timing excessively to prevent detonation but sacrificing throttle response and acceleration. The oil pan was shallow and held minimal capacity, leading to marginal oil pressure during sustained operation and inadequate cooling for the oil itself. The water pump was a standard flow unit that struggled to maintain optimal operating temperatures. During hot weather or sustained highway driving, the engine mounts were soft rubber pieces designed to isolate vibration, but they allowed excessive engine movement under hard acceleration, creating a sensation of the entire powertrain shifting and twisting. The 318 could run forever in taxi service, logging hundreds of thousands of miles with minimal maintenance. But asking it to move a 4,000-pound personal luxury coupe with any enthusiasm was simply beyond its capabilities. The power delivery was smooth but completely inadequate, with the engine building torque gradually from idle but never producing enough thrust to overcome the Polaris's weight. Under hard acceleration, the 318 would strain audibly while the Polar lumbered forward with all the urgency of a loaded delivery truck. The handling was exactly what you'd expect from a full-size Chrysler product, which meant soft suspension tuned exclusively for ride comfort. Body roll was massive. The steering was over-assisted to the point of being completely numb, and the overall chassis behavior was wallowy and disconnected. Inside, the Polar featured typical late 60s Chrysler interior design with bench seats, basic instrumentation, and materials appropriate for a fleet vehicle. The overall ambience was pure taxicab despite whatever sporting exterior details Dodge had applied. The exterior styling attempted to evoke muscle car aggression with bold graphics, simulated hood scoops, and aggressive front-end treatment. The problem was that nothing could disguise the Polaris's fundamental nature as a full-size family sedan. Number 8. The 1965 Mercury Comet Base. 58. Mercury positioned the Comet as a sporty compact that could compete with Mustangs and Barracudas, creating advertising campaigns that emphasized performance and youth appeal. The reality of the base V8 Comet was far more disappointing, delivering performance barely adequate for a family sedan. The 289 cubic inch V8 produced just 200 horsepower, adequate for moving the Comet's modest 2,800 pounds curb weight, but not enough to provide any kind of exciting performance. 1/4 mile times hovered around 16.5 seconds. 0 to 60 acceleration required over 9 seconds. The engine felt strained and breathless above 4,000 RPM, producing more mechanical noise than actual forward progress. Passing slower traffic required dropping down to gears and waiting for the 289 to build momentum over an extended distance. Contemporary magazine tests consistently noted that the base Comet felt slower than its specifications, suggested with tepid acceleration that failed to generate any driving excitement whatsoever. The 289 was Ford's small block V8 in relatively mild specification, with a 2-barrel carburetor, modest compression ratio, and camshaft ground for low-speed torque rather than high RPM power. The result was an engine that felt adequate for normal driving, but completely overwhelmed when you asked for any kind of spirited performance. The engine note was muted and characterless, producing mechanical sounds rather than any kind of V8 rumble. Under hard acceleration, the 289 would rev willingly but deliver minimal excitement. The handling was competent for a compact of the era, with the Comet's relatively lightweight and compact dimensions providing decent agility. The problem was that without adequate power, the handling capabilities went largely unused. Inside, the Comet featured Mercury's typical mid-60s interior design with vinyl upholstery, basic instrumentation, and materials that looked and felt economy-grade. The overall ambience was pure, compact economy car, despite Mercury's attempts to suggest otherwise. The exterior styling was handsome in a generic way, with clean lines and reasonable proportions that made the Comet attractive, if not particularly distinctive. The Comet looked pleasant and inoffensive, which was exactly the problem for a vehicle marketed as sporty and exciting. Number 7. The 1962 Chevrolet Biscayne, 409 low output. The Chevrolet 409 cubic inch V8 would become legendary as one of the great big block engines of the muscle car era. But in low output specification, installed in the heavy Biscayne sedan, the 409 became a disappointing underachiever. A big block that couldn't deliver performance worthy of its displacement or reputation. The low-output 409 produced 340 horsepower numbers. That sound impressive until you consider they came from nearly 7 L of displacement and had to move the Biscayne's 3,700 pounds bulk. 1/4 mile times hovered around 15.5 seconds. 0 to 60 acceleration took approximately 8 seconds. The low-output 409 featured a single 4-barrel carburetor, modest compression ratio, and cam shaft ground for low-et torque rather than high RPM power. This created an engine that built decent thrust from low RPM, but ran out of breath quickly as engine speed climbed. The Biskin's weight was the 409's greatest enemy, with the full-size sedan's massive bulk absorbing the engine's power output. The car lumbered off the line with decent initial thrust, but couldn't sustain acceleration the way lighter vehicles could. The handling was typical full-size Chevrolet, which meant soft suspension tuned exclusively for ride comfort and isolation. Body roll was massive, 600 pounds bulk. The Marlin's weight was a significant problem, with AMC's platform being heavier than comparable offerings from the Big Three. The fastback body style added structural reinforcement that increased weight further while providing questionable aerodynamic benefits. The handling was terrible even by mid-60s standards, with soft suspension that allowed massive body roll and created Snort's unpredictable behavior at the limit. The steering was vague and imprecise, with significant play before the wheels would respond to inputs. Inside, the Marlin featured AMC's typical mid-60s interior design with vinyl upholstery, basic instrumentation, and materials that looked and felt cheap. The fastback roofline created a claustrophobic cabin with limited headroom and poor visibility. The exterior styling was the Marlin's greatest liability, with proportions that looked wrong from every angle. The fastback roofline was grafted onto a body that was fundamentally designed as a conventional sedan, creating visual discontinuity and awkward lines. Number 2. The 1964 Pontiac Tempest. Lemon's Base F Pontiac's Tempest platform spawned one of the greatest muscle cars ever created. When John DeLorean and his team stuffed a 389 cubic in V8 into the intermediate body and created the GTO, but the base Tempest Lemon's, with its 326 cubic in V8, represented the opposite end of the spectrum. The 326 cubic in V8 produced 250 horsepower, numbers that sound adequate but translated into disappointing real-world performance. 1/4 mile times hovered around 16 seconds. 0 to 60 acceleration required over 9 seconds. The 326 was Pontiac's small displacement V8, designed to provide V8 smoothness and sound without the cost, weight, or insurance implications of larger engines. The two-barrel carburetor, modest compression ratio, and conservative camshaft timing created an engine that felt adequate for normal driving, but completely overwhelmed when you asked for any spirited performance. The power delivery was smooth, but completely lacking in the excitement that characterized Pontiac's larger engines. The 326 built torque gradually from idle, providing adequate low-speed flexibility, but never producing the surge of acceleration that made driving exciting. Number. The 1962 Dodge Dart 413. The top spot is the 1962 Dodge Dart 413. And that placement reflects this car's status as perhaps the most disappointing muscle car experiment of the entire decade. On paper, the Dart 413 should have been a winner. A relatively compact body stuffed with a massive big block engine. In reality, it became a cautionary tale about what happens when you prioritize engine size over proper engineering development. The 413 cubic in V8 produced 410 horsepower. Genuinely impressive numbers for 1,962.14 mile times hovered around 15.5 seconds. Respectable for the era, but disappointing given the massive engine. 0 to 60 acceleration, approximate 7 seconds. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a future update. We've got a lot more exciting tech stories coming your way. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.